So the Feast of the Epiphany is the second oldest feast observed in the church from the late 2nd century after the Feast of Easter. Right? So even before we started celebrating a feast day for Christmas, we started celebrating a feast day for Epiphany, of God's revelation to the world, of Jesus' revelation to the world. In the Eastern Church, that has been Jesus' baptism. So they've focused upon him being revealed as the Son of the Father, the only begotten Son, at his baptism, the Spirit coming down and revealing who Jesus was in that way. The Western Church has often looked at it as the light to the Gentiles, about Jesus' salvation that extends to all the ends of the earth. And so there's been something of a contrast. But as we approach this feast day, it should call to mind to us a number of those epiphanies, of manifestations or self-revelations of God, right? The angels announce to the shepherds that a Messiah is born. The wise men or the magi come in search of the king, right? At his baptism, Jesus is revealed, and the synagogue, he himself declares himself the Messiah, reveals himself the Messiah, and at the wedding feast of Cana, he shows himself divine through the miracle that he performs with the water and the wine. All of these things should come to us as a recognition of God's communication to us through Jesus of who he is, that we open our hearts to that mystery that is made manifest to us in our own lives. There are lots of different ways that you can respond to that manifestation. Right? We see 3 examples in the gospel reading today of how different groups respond to the revelation of who Jesus is. The first group is really represented by Herod. Right? Herod is the response of fear. He is afraid of his power being taken, of his domain being usurped, right? That he is afraid of losing something that is his, that the baby, the new Messiah to be born or that is born, will take from him. So in that way that he is afraid, and he really lashes out with violence and with hate. Right? The second one is really the chief priests and the scribes that are gathered. They are very knowledgeable about their faith, and in fact, every time at the end of a synagogue service, they would pray for the speedy arrival of the Messiah. But when faced with the information that the Messiah has been born, they're indifferent, right? They don't want to be bothered by that. They're comfortable with what they have and the systems that they're in, and they're familiar with all of that. So even though they've been praying for the Messiah, they're not really looking for the Messiah. And then we have the Magi that come from the east. Right? These wise men that come in search, they've had some expectation through their familiarization with the scriptures of the coming of a Messiah. And then they see the sign in the created world of the star that they follow. And then they seek the way to his presence and they offer him their gifts. They worship, they adore. Right? So their response is really one of worship. So sometimes there can be a response of fear, sometimes there can be a response of indifference, and sometimes we can have a response of true worship. So if we want, which one do you think's best? So if we have a response of true worship, if that's the direction we're going, what can we learn from the Magi about how to do that effectively in our own lives? What are the kind of emphases that we can have that help us to enter into that worship of God, whether it's here in our own personal prayer times, when we're gathered with other sacraments or reading the Bible, when we're trying to open our hearts to that mystery, that manifestation of God's presence. What are the things from the Magi that we can learn? And I'd like to point to 3 of those. The first is curiosity. The Magi are curious about the world. They're curious about the scriptures. They're curious about the signs they see. They're curious about the journey that they're going to take, right? They move out of their comfort zone because of their curiosity. They go on this long journey seeking intentionally that which they hope to find, right? For us, we need to develop that kind of sense of curiosity within us, one that helps to move us outside of our comfort zones, that helps to engage us on the way and on the path of intentionally seeking God's presence, that we are looking for that, right? When we worship, we come expecting something of God to show up. We have to expect something new, some adventure. You know, it's the how does that go? If you ever want to make God laugh, just tell him your plans, right? There's always something new with God. What is that? Are we looking? Are we curious? Are we seeking to find that newness? The second thing is really their generous response, right? So their generosity, and we can think of that in terms of the gold and frankincense and myrrh, but I would say in our own lives as we consider a generous response, it's not just about the material possessions or even about what those things might represent in the scriptures, right? For us, one of the things that we can be generous with is our attention. It's one of the things that people are starving for, that we have so many distractions and we engage in so many different screens and so many different things that attention is at a deficit most of the time. And so if we can be intentional for somebody, it is really an act of generosity. If we can be attentive to someone, it is an act of generosity, right? If we are coming to worship here to be attentive to God, to His Word, to the humble preaching of His pastor here, right? If we can be attentive to the prayers that we do, that is a great act of generosity on behalf of our own hearts. It's about giving that gift of ourselves through that gift of our attentiveness. And then finally, what I'd like to say is that the wise men, the Magi, were wise. They showed wisdom, right? They measured things. They adjusted their course. They recognized where God was leading them and where He wasn't leading them. We engage in worship not by turning off our minds, but by engaging with our minds. Not by just simply abandoning our will or ignoring it, but by intentionally asking God's will to be done for our wills, right? We come into worship with that wisdom that can lead us in a new path. Sometimes in our lives, that wisdom will lead us in a direction that says we need to change our lives. We have to change some behavior, some way that we're thinking, something that we're doing regularly, that we need help to do that and we need to engage with that, and that is being destructive for either our relationship with God, our relationship with others, or our relationship with the world, right? And so maybe we can think of those things like, oh, wisdom is leading me to change my life. I need to lay that on the altar today. Or maybe wisdom is leading us into a new direction, a new outreach, a new growth in virtue in some area, something that we can develop that really moves us outside of ourselves. Something maybe that you've never even thought of before, but comes to you all of a sudden in an aha moment. That's an epiphany. That comes to us when we recognize the movement of the Holy Spirit that gives us a new idea. So we come here wanting to be like the wise men, wanting to have a response of generosity, a response of curiosity, and a response of wisdom to God, so that we can be people who truly enter into worship and make our lives, not just an hour on Sunday or Saturday night, but our lives being an act of worship to God, that our lives give Him glory, that our lives are a light, that our lives bring His presence to others. As we enter into this Eucharist, it's always the opportunity for us to lay upon this altar all that we are. And in particular, sometimes very specific things that we're dealing with, or things that we're carrying, or things that we want to change, or concerns that we have for others. As we come to this Eucharist, not fearful, not afraid of God or that encounter, not indifferent to that encounter, but desiring to worship, may we lay upon this altar what really matters, who we really are, the things that are really important to us. And may tonight be a moment when the light of the world is revealed in our own hearts, in our community, and through us to the world.